Hello, good evening, and welcome, dear viewer, wherever you are. I shall remove the traditional headgear of the show. That's obviously, if you've seen it before, you know that this is our official headgear to be worn at all social events and occasions. Fairly full house this evening. Let's see, I think I get it right from the right. We've got Bruce, we've got someone new with us this evening, Ian Povey from Clear Vision Security. Then David Kovar's there, another David, handily two Davids set together, Tian's in the middle, James Dunthorne, who's finished his homework, Kevin, Loretta, and finally Steve all the way on the other side there. Well, that was the week that was, and what a week it has been so far. Where shall we start? I think we'd like to start with Ian. Ian, for our UK-based viewers, we have a bit of an issue with a survey conducted by BALPA, the British Airline Pilots Association, and the government, in which they told us, a chicken and several assorted animals told us that the sky was going to fall in. And you've unpacked those stats, or you've had a good look at it, and I was very impressed with what you wrote. So maybe you could share your opinion of that BALPA report with us.
Okay, yeah. Basically, the BALPA is a mid-air collision study that was done with BALPA, the Department for Transport, and the Military Aviation Authority in the UK. And essentially, it's looking at what would happen if a drone collided with an aircraft in the UK. So what they tended to do for the study was they used airliner windscreens, helicopter windscreens, and helicopter tail rotors. My understanding of it, having looked at the study, is it was heavily prejudicial from the start, lots of experimental bias. It looks very much like there was a predetermined decision as to what the outcome would be, or what outcome they wanted to find. Namely, they wanted to show that windscreens weren't safe around drones, or helicopter tail rotors weren't safe around drones. So there's a lot of worrying aspects of the way this study has been financed, prepared, and then distributed, because all we've received is just basically a summary of the study. The key data is missing from that. There's some very dubious language that's used to try and obscure some of the information. So, for instance, the 4-kilogram quadcopter class model, they say that caused critical failure to an airliner windscreen in live testing and modeling. So it doesn't specify whether it was in the live testing that occurred, or whether it was in the modeling phase that occurred. So it's very, very difficult to actually piece together what the findings of the study actually are. BALPA, however, have concluded that, yep, drones are extremely dangerous for all kinds of aviation, and therefore they need to be regulated, which, you know, it fits into the government's plan perfectly, because the government is saying, that's a very good idea. I think we need to do that to, you know, bring in this drone traffic management system. And a lot of the stuff is, if you look at the study in itself, just on its own, you get one sort of piece of the jigsaw. If you look at the response paper that the government published in response to a consultation process it had, you'll see many, many more pieces of the jigsaw, which all seem to be gearing towards basically commercializing the airspace for delivery drone systems, but they're not mentioning that at all. So what we're getting in the UK is basically regulation and registration in order to facilitate services like Amazon, but we're not being told that. We're being told instead, you're a bunch of dangerous cretins, you don't know what you're doing, you're going to kill us all, therefore this is what we have to do.
Unfortunately, I think you're bob on right. Amazon have said that they do not want model aviation happening outside of places where model aviation traditionally happens. It should be, in the case of the UK, BMFA fields and things like that. They do not want private drones or model aircraft flying out in the outer sphere, which is absolutely outrageous. The viewer that's been here before will have heard me rant that at Farnborough in last year, 16, the Amazon rep was awful. They lied to me directly, and their presentation was dreadful. And I had a Civil Aviation Authority guy, UK CAA guy, stood next to me, and under his breath he said that will never be allowed to happen, what they were proposing at the thing.
Yeah.
So hopefully that is still the UK CAA's mindset, and they can't be too blurred, because unfortunately I think this gig is something that the government's balls picking up and running with, and the CAA are being dragged along. I don't know, what's your feeling on that?
Well, you see, the problem with the CAA is that they are part of the government. They're actually a sub-part of the Department for Transport. So what will happen is the Department for Transport can overrule anything the CAA says. And if you look at the CAA's response to the government's response, sorry, it gets a bit convoluted at times, but in response to this consultation process, the CAA have issued a statement saying that they support the drone traffic management system. And so pretty much it's basically everything is gearing towards this commercialization of the airspace. And what we're going to have then is, at the moment, we're having a discussion in other areas about net neutrality, particularly in the US at the moment. What will end up happening with airspace is we'll have airspace neutrality issues, where the model that the government's proposing is that you register on an app, you have to log into that app before you fly. They also want live telemetry to go from that app to some kind of central hub so that they can coordinate all of the traffic in the skies. That then has knock-on issues for security, what kind of telemetry, what kind of data is being transmitted, what vulnerabilities are present in that. And it's not too difficult to imagine you could be out flying your drone perfectly legally, and then all of a sudden it returns to home, lands at your feet, and you can't take it off again because Amazon have got a drone scheduled to come through that airspace. And that's pretty much the genius move of the UK government is that it's getting drone users to pay for the beginnings of this infrastructure. What happened in the US is, I think the government wanted Amazon to pay for some of the infrastructure. Amazon weren't too happy with that. Amazon then decided to leave the US, come to the UK. A few months, I think 6 months after Amazon started getting permission to do trials in the UK, then we have this consultation process. Then we have, so you've seen a very, very rapid development of regulations, all under the guise of public consultation, safety, education. And BALPA have gone along with it completely. And they've even misrepresented the results. Steve Landells is quite a character these days for saying that drones will cause an uncontained engine failure on an airliner, even though there's no evidence to show that. BALPA have said that this image that everyone's seen now shows a quadcopter. And I think their wording is a large hobbyist class drone penetrating an airliner windscreen. So I've challenged them on this directly, publicly. I've asked them, I've sent an email to their communications team requesting them to retract it or explain why they don't need to retract it, because that model that they show is clearly the 4 kilogram class quadcopter model. At no point in the live testing did that model penetrate the airliner windscreen. The only model to penetrate the airliner windscreen in the testing phase, the live testing phase, is a 3.5 kilo fixed wing model. But I presume they didn't have a picture of that, so they used this picture instead and decided to try and get the point across, which is, generally speaking, that is what happens in the media. People fudge things. But if you're fudging something that is being used to justify increased regulation and statutory, mandatory regulations that are imposed on people, then you can't get away with it. You need to have more of an ethical approach to it. And so I'm pushing BALPA at the moment. Today I spoke to the Department for Transport's one of their press secretaries. I've then forwarded a formal request to them in writing, asking them very straightforwardly, do they support this view that BALPA have said that this is a drone penetrating an airliner windscreen, and asked them for a simple yes or no. Not heard back from them yet. it'll be interesting to hear what the response is. At the moment, they tend to say anything that they don't want to speak about is national security issues. But they'll be hard pushed to say this is a national security issue. So hopefully we'll get a response on that.
No, it's quite funny, just following the BALPA Facebook page with the post that's gone up with their article, and the picture taken during drone collision testing shows a large hobbyist class drone penetrating an aircraft windscreen. And I challenged them and said, when did a DJI 450 carry a GH4 up to that altitude? You know, it just wouldn't be possible. You know, use a Mavic, use a Phantom, use a Unique as the hobby stylist class drone. And the response that I got was, BALPA aren't anti-drone. These tests were done under a controlled environment, but they still didn't answer my question. It's just ridiculous. The whole thing's a farce.
Everything with BALPA is a misrepresentation, is what I'm finding. For instance, they presented it in the press release saying it was a result of independent testing. They actually co-sponsored it. Not only did they co-sponsor it, they co-authored it as well. They were involved in setting the remit for the testing. Then if you look back prior to that, in mid-2016, Steve Landells was actually giving interviews to The Guardian and The Independent, calling for this testing, specifically this exact testing of firing not just drones at airliner windscreens, drone components at airliner windscreens. So the exact test that they have just conducted that is supposedly independent is the precise remit of a test that Steve Landells was calling for the government to implement 6 months before they did. So
it's quite funny, actually, just touching on what you said previously about them trying to force a registration system. One of BALPA's replies here on their Facebook page was to a guy that was basically, again, arguing the same thing. You know, he didn't use a hobby-based system, he used a 4.5 kilo system, apparently at 10,000 feet, traveling at 240 or 50 knots or whatever it's supposed to be. And BALPA replied with, many violations happen because people are ignorant of the rules or ignorant of the potential effects of ignoring them. The kind of scheme we are arguing for will mean that users will be exposed to the rules and regs before being able to use their drone for the first time. We would also like to see a system whereby a drone is registered so that the authorities can trace a drone when a violation occurs, which would also discourage inappropriate routes. These are sensible steps. Really, BALPA. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, if you actually look at the registration system that's being proposed at the moment by the UK government, it's not even a registration system of drones, it's a register of drone users. And so what will happen is, for instance, the issue around Gatwick, where someone saw a drone within the vicinity of the airport, therefore everything was rerouted. That drone could have been flying quite legally because a sub 7 kilo drone in the UK can fly within an air traffic zone without requiring any permission whatsoever. It could just have been an overcautious response to say, basically, there is a drone, we don't know who's flying it, as a caution, we'll reroute the traffic. That then gets blown up into the media to be practically nightmare scenario, plane almost downed by drone situation, must find the culprit. The police didn't find the culprit. As far as I know, they still haven't found the culprit, bearing in mind Sussex police that look after Gatwick Airport have 5 Ariane Skyranger drones that specifically are for anti-terrorist training and anti-terrorist operations around Gatwick Airport. They have police at Gatwick Airport, and yet they still couldn't find this drone pilot. What will happen in the registration system that's proposed is they would not have to find the drone pilot, they'd just wait, they'd check the ANPR data against a list of drone users in that area, draw up a short list, and then start knocking on doors. And then also suggested is give the police the power to seize drones and other technology related to it. So they could quite rightly, in the future, knock at your door, walk into your house, whether they've got a warrant or not, they won't need it, take your drone, take your controller, and basically you are then subject to search, even though you've not done anything wrong. So there's a lot of issues in terms of law enforcement procedures, methods, civil liberties that are just getting trampled on at the moment.
Well, Steve Cohen's colleague, Kenji, is currently on the American Remote Identification ARC. Sadly, he's not here with us tonight because he's actually presenting, I think, this very evening. He is presenting his remote ID thing to the FAA. How did all that sound to you there, Steve, from the Doug?
Well, I think that to me well, first of all, there's a good whiff of fish coming off the whole verification and proof thereof of the effect of the impact. So right there, I'm leery. I mean, I think that something that Kenji and our leadership has discussed is really about how to do in-air ID in the most unobtrusive, privacy, protecting way. And clearly, it just seems that in this climate, that it just it sort of falls on deaf ears to some extent. It will be interesting to see what becomes of the UAS ID ARC. And what's recommended. I think he wrote a white paper looking at sort of high-powered Bluetooth as a means of identifying in close range, kind of rationalizing that there wouldn't really need to be anything from far out. I'm probably paraphrasing poorly, but the thing that we're looking at is that if you're looking for a registry, in theory and in proper practice, we're not against it. If there's a beacon involved, we've talked in the past on this program about ADS-B, small UAS avionics and stuff like that, and that's something that we sense that as being pushed by industry because it's what they've got, whereas it's dated and it's going to overwhelm a system of traffic control where there's going to be a sea of dots on someone's readout, and it's sort of just that too much information in a sense, kind of keeping it to the machine rather than to a larger network, at least for the moment. I mean, I do think that it will be perhaps inevitable that this will tie in some way to UTM, but the growth curve, the learning curve between where we are right now and actual UTM implementation is going to be bumpy and painful, I'm afraid. That's really
the Amazon are on that remote ARC over there, aren't they?
They are. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's people with big money are getting ready to drive decisions all around the world.
That's right.
So to me, I've been finding myself getting increasingly angry. So guys from Altitude Angel came on and were very good and reassured me a little bit about UTMs, and I had a warm and fuzzy feeling about it. So I came away with that with a warm fuzzy feeling.
I mean, I want to be clear too. I'm using UTM. Maybe I'm being too broad, and I'm using it as a concept, not necessarily as the implementation as it stands right now, but some sort of networked identification of anything in the air.
It's going to happen, isn't it? And the thing is, it's the people that are rushing to monetize it that worries me, and I'm just quite happy to push. Not only, because to be fair, they'll not only will they have to push model aircraft out of the way, but they'll have to push low-level light aircraft and helicopters out of the way as well, because they present more of a danger to your drone delivery than the very few model aircraft or drones that you'll bump into. So really, what they're proposing is something that will be troublesome. So maybe we all need to stop buying from Amazon and things like that. Vote with our wallets. I don't suppose that'll make any difference.
I mean, here's the thing that I wonder is that in a perfect world, in a system that could, in some ways, address each segment of a route, let's say, that sort of traffic control should be doable. But when you're just talking about recreational use where someone's noodling around with a drone at, let's say, 400 feet, if that's in the flight path, a drone highway, you know, how does that work? Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of puzzled.
Well, I'm going to throw it to the floor in a second, but I reckon the drone of the future will have vision-based sensors, and it will get out of the way. It'll make a decision, and it'll route itself. I think we're creating a system that's not needed because the drones will get clever enough to get out of the way. I don't think it's needed, but other than taking the checks, taking the micropayments, just like your children's games, you know, and the in-app purchases. I mean, that to me is where it's going. But I'll stop ranting now. Throw it back to the floor.
Well,
I mean, you, Bruce.
You raised a couple of points that I was trying to bring up. One is, you know, if drone delivery starts impacting existing manned aviation, particularly recreational aviation, you're now essentially taking from an existing class of users, and they're going to be extremely unhappy. And then there's also an existing class of users in that space, crop dusters and medical helicopters are the two that come to mind as prime users as well, that you simply cannot just kick out of that space. They've been using that space for an incredibly long time, and we depend on those services. The other thing that was just presented, Kansas and AirMap just announced that they've got this thing going in Kansas where they seem to be planning on using AirMap as the UTM solution for the state of Kansas. There are a couple of questions that come up with that. First of all, is there a drone ID component to that mechanism? The second one is more of the legal side of things, where now, if they are going to go forward with this, they are now essentially saying, we, the state of Kansas, are going to take care of air traffic control for UAVs, forget about the federal government, forget about everybody else. And we're starting to get another one of these very highly segmented set of regulations and laws and technologies that maybe if you fly from Kansas over into the next state, you've got to change your entire system for being tracked by whatever the UAV ATC solution is.
I mean, I think that's always been the issue in terms of doing some sort of regional or local or even on a state-by-state basis, that you become unaware or lax about, you know, where your location is, and you've got not just one rulemaking or enforcement body to be concerned with, but several, one or several of which you're not sure you even need to contact or forget to contact. So that just makes it's a hindrance, certainly, to commercial activity on the smaller scale. You know, perhaps it's something that can be hard coded, almost like the AirMap interface, where it kind of gives you the you know, the locations that you're meant to contact, or, you know, are you operating under this kind of you know, license or recreational, and, you know, which airports and so. But it's just it gets pretty hairy. You know, it gets getting more complicated.
And there's another manned aviation component to this, in that I don't know how many people here are actually manned aviation pilots, but you've got a very crowded avionics suite already, and all of that equipment is licensed and regulated, and who installs it and things like that. And so if air traffic control for another class of vehicles in your space is managed by a completely new system, how are the existing manned aircraft going to be able to interact with those, both to consume their data but also to push data back out to them? It needs to be an integrated system. It can't be this sort of federated system where this class of users, which is Amazon, is using this system, and recreational pilots in Kansas are using this system, but everybody else is using ADS-B, air traffic control, towers, all the rest of it.
Do you think Kansas will be able to cope with flying houses? Anyway, that's just, I had to say it. It's
Trying to throw it in there, huh?
Throw it in there. Well, I don't know if it's thrown. It was blown, wasn't it?
Well, Gary, I'd like to hear the panel and everyone included, please speak up, because, you know, we constantly talk to each other about what other people are doing. You know, with what that report we just got just now, what we're talking about with Kansas, we're the group of people and individuals that need to provide the solutions and suggestions and start advocating what the best ideas for everyone are. When we look at overall, me from the commercial UAS standpoint, that is where I come from, that is what I manage, and coming from an RC background, everyone else on here from an RC background, what can you stand behind and advocate? You know, this is the panel right now. It's the biggest one I've been on. I think it's time to start sharing that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kevin, and that's something that we're trying to do even with Consortic. You know, we're trying to open up in the UK now some regulations by doing some bits and pieces for the CAA. They've actually been quite forthcoming, and the problem I think is with some of these approaches, as you rightly said, you know, it's not being done. It's not coming from the operators. It's coming from management at a high level, sitting in an office. They've never been out and done a day's flying in their lives, you know, and it's us as the operators, the end users, the people that are out there working with this day in and day out. You know, we understand the tech. We understand and have the vision of where the industry is going, where we want it to go, and that's how it should be steered and directed, not by someone at a high level in an office somewhere that literally does not understand where the future is going.
No, the other side of that, and that's a great point, David, is you know, the ships are being sailed by these mega billion corporations, and you know, their interests either through the next gen ATC or their own commercial UAS interests, and it's really forcing the hand of these agencies. But you know, and Gary's heard me say it before about advocating 30 years of RC, and there wasn't one word about it. You know, and that's basically, I'd like to start writing more about that. You know, going back to that style of just following those guidelines of keeping it below 400 feet and staying away from airports. If you start using automation, you've now entered the realm of commercial and registration. And it's that simple. If you want to use any kind of automated waypoint system, any kind of autopilot on your airframes, you've become a licensed UAS pilot in commercial operations.
That's flying in the face. That's flying in the face of an enormous number of startups and hobbyist desires. I mean, look at all the selfie drones. Look at all the follow me capabilities. Look at all of these things are automated. I mean, and even just GPS stabilization is automated. So if you're saying if you automate it, you're commercial, you've now essentially said get everything that's not a pure RC aircraft is now a commercial aircraft.
So if you're talking about just straight and level flight and GPS assistance, that's not an automated waypoint following. Selfie drones are not going to a waypoint following. They're following a transponder that's on you or a focus through a facial or camera.
Transponder is a waypoint. It is automatically
I think that's splitting hairs. That's splitting hairs, David. I would say that if you're flying a mapping mission using a waypoint system, or you're using a third-party application to perform a grid pattern, that is the automation that I'm talking about.
Okay, can I jump in here a second, because I think that perhaps it would be a better distinction between beyond line of sight and not beyond line of sight, because I personally do mapping missions, mow the lawn, automated missions in education. So that's a conceivably a recreational, at least in this country, activity. So I kind of bristle at the automated. I mean, listen, we are coming into a world that is all about smart machines, and you know, students need to be exposed to that stuff. And I don't think that should be the defining line between you know, purely commercial versus, you know, recreational. Perhaps beyond line of sight. I mean, I think that's not a bad distinction.
But that's already sort of being ignored, isn't it, by users of multiple systems of flying beyond visual line of sight anyway, when they shouldn't be. So you can't use it as a yardstick. So
I agree with Gary there. Beyond line of sight requires a different commitment and financial investment to your airframe, and there's people trying to do it now that don't really have the correct hardware or the comms to do it.
Well, not only that,
you know,
as well,
that would be a big difference.
Not only that as well, there are now people doing beyond visual line of sight with Mavics. They jailbreak them, they stick beefy antennas, they fly them up to 6,000 feet in UK airspace around London. I mean,
I find that just so confounding and disturbing.
Absolutely. that is so scary, man. Reading that is scary.
Well, we're
Now-
again,
now-
the trouble is we're the room of converts or of people that are all on the singing from the same song sheet, aren't we? It's
not on my
outside of-
topic, obviously.
Well, I don't know what your song's going to be. I just wanted to try and drag Loretta into this from the just what I was thinking about, which you might not be able to answer, Loretta, but from your previous FAA life, how would the FAA look at Kansas having one set of rules and the next state another and the next another? Surely that's just an instant nightmare, unless AirMap are hoping to roll it into the whole country.
Well, certainly in the old days when I worked at the FAA, that would have been unheard of. I mean, I've certainly heard rumors of the FAA being willing to give up the lower airspace. I hope those rumors are not true, because I think that would be a disaster to have, because it's not even a state. I mean, you could have boundaries that are community to community and nobody knows what those boundaries are. So I think it's a real mistake to go down that path. I mean, as long as we are a United States, our airspace should stay united. I also think that a lot of the hysteria about drones, if you go back and think of drones as bicycles, and yes, I get that they're in the air, but everything can't be regulated to the nth degree. And you don't want to kill the spirit of hobbyists and children. I mean, I think of those flying Barbie dolls, for God's sake. Are we going to, require them to have ID chips in them too? So I am not a proponent of registration for hobby drones. I'm not a proponent of identification, except in areas where they could mix with regular delivery drones or aircraft at the higher altitudes. I think there just has to be space for recreation and people playing with model drones.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty much everyone here will agree to some respect that drones are going to be problematic. They do cause a risk both to air users, to security agencies, and to public on the ground. So I think we all kind of share that common ground. However, I think what Steve picked up on is actually quite significant, which is really where this requirement for registration has come from, is the whole thing about flying beyond line of sight. Now, RC aircraft, remote control aircraft, you couldn't fly beyond line of sight because it would be upside down and in the ground before you could get there. Now, drones you can fly up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet and get in the way of a 737, going into Gatwick. And this is what I think has sparked a lot of the concern for the regulators and the government, is actually the risk that it's posing to manned aircraft, because they can no longer be attached to the person. Loretta, you brought up about a bike, but you have to be on a bike to misuse it. And so if someone does misuse it, they can bring that back to the actual the person riding it. Whereas with a drone, you could be flying it 3-4 kilometers away from yourself, and the authorities will have no idea who's flying it, over children's heads at sort of 5 meters above children's heads. So I think that's one thing. And I think the second,
registration doesn't help you there. Registration doesn't help you there.
Well, I think what registration does is it's the start of being able to track beyond line of sight and being able to track people's drones. Because if we wanted to give people the capability of flying beyond line of sight, then the only way to do that safely and to address some of these concerns is to be able to track them. The government clearly aren't going to let everyone start flying beyond line of sight without them being tracked, because anyone could drop one on number 10 Downing Street quite easily. So what they're trying to do, I think, is they're trying to bring in a way of being able to track them via a UTM, which we've previously talked about. And that also sort of brings me into the second part, which is really how do we go beyond line of sight? There's two main ways really, which is they either have to avoid other aircraft themselves, or we have to segregate the airspace. And at the moment, we're operating in a segregated airspace kind of world where we're below 400 feet. So the risk of actually coming into contact with another aircraft is quite low. And you've got the ability, the pilot on the ground who can avoid them as well. But if if we're going to start pushing it outwards, I think in the short term, the only way we can do that is via sort of a risk analysis on if we're going to fly beyond line of sight. If you're flying above a power line, 20 meters above a power line, then you pretty much can call that segregated airspace. So I think in the short term, to get beyond line of sight, I think that segregated airspace is really our only option. But what they're looking at, I think, is the next stage, which is how do we actually get them to interact and avoid other aircraft? And for that, there's two ways. We either go centralized or decentralized. Centralized is a UTM where every aircraft essentially has a transponder in it. They know where all of them are. Or they do it decentralized and have each aircraft as a very intelligent robot, essentially, with the ability to see like a human can. Now, a lot of the work I was doing at Loughborough University's Autonomous Systems research labs was looking into collision avoidance systems and trying to prove their safety. And it's incredibly difficult to prove a vision-based system. Looking at a vision-based system, there's so many variables in the environment, in sunlight, if you suddenly get a few bugs on your camera. How can you take all these into effect and prove their safety? And that's incredibly difficult. Human being doesn't look with their eyes, they look with their brain, and actually trying to replicate that in a machine is incredibly difficult. So I think really the only option we have in the medium term is a UTM system, and this is the sort of first few steps of that I see coming in.
Just to address some of James's points there, we've been, as a model flyer, I've been flying beyond visual line of sight for many, many years with free flight models. I mean, you let them go, the helicothermal, they're gone. So it's not something that's new. It has been there a long time, but there's never been a level of risk associated with it. When we're looking at these regulations, we're talking about commercial versus recreational. That shouldn't come into the regulatory framework. It's risk. It's what's the riskiest operation. The regulators shouldn't care whether someone's making money out of something or whether they're not. Their job is to make the airspace safe, not to tax people because they're flying commercially. It's just to make it safe. And as soon as you bring in the commercial versus recreational imperative, it skews your risk assessment, and that makes for bad regulation. So I think there has to be a lot done there. The other thing is that bringing in registration, all this sort of stuff, people are assuming that bad actors are going to comply with some of the laws at least. Well, they're not going to. If someone wants to fly a drone over number 10 Downing Street and blow someone up, they're not going to register that drone. So registration won't stop that happening. What you've got to have is regulations that the average sensible law-abiding person will accept and therefore comply with. And for the people who are not going to accept regulations, you need enforcement. You need really good enforcement. And that's one of the things that is missing at the moment. And I just want to talk a bit about David's, no, it wasn't David, it was a chap on the end, about the British Airline Pilots Association. There's so much rubbish. Here's a couple of things that I read in the media just the other week. This is from The Sun, which is almost as good as the Daily Mail. It said a Category A incident involving a passenger jet and a drone occurred over the nation's capital in mid-2016 as an Airbus 320 was making its final approach to Heathrow. The plane was flying over the Shard when it came into contact with a small black drone. The gadget reportedly hovered over the right wing as the pilot watched on from the flight deck window. Excuse me? I don't know any drone that can hover over an Airbus wing when it's unapproached. That's so fast. How many? 160 knots? How many drones do we know that can do that? And then from the Get Surrey, which I guess is a local news source, a helicopter was forced to perform a dramatic maneuver to avoid crashing with the drone near Blackbush Airport. Investigators reported that the pilot of a twin squirrel helicopter was forced to take evasive action in just 1 second after spotting the drone about 330 feet ahead at the same altitude. The twin rotor drone passed within a few feet of the left-hand side of the civilian helicopter. Twin rotor? Really? I don't know of any twin rotor drones. But this is the kind of garbage we're getting in the media, and the Airline Pilots Association is using this as a method. I think they're using it as a vector. They're probably making a whole lot of these complaints. And the only thing I can think of is that aliens are now using drones, because if you look at the news reports, the number of UFO sightings from pilots has almost disappeared. Now it's all drones. So obviously the problem drones are being flown by aliens. So just ban aliens. Simple.
Yeah, fair enough. Simples. Yeah, I don't know why it's not been done. I've already put in a link down below, as YouTube people say, and things like that. A link to Ian's fantastic articles, and there's been follow-up stuff as well, because we must move on. Look, we've been going 40 minutes of this. We're still only at the first flipping topic, it really is worth a read, and I think it is. It is a kind of an international problem as well, because the same sort of levers are being used in the States and are being used all over the world, being used in Australia, the same, even New Zealand, even the Hobbits. The same sort of
sorry, if I could just jump in there.
Go on.
I noticed, I think it was yesterday, there was a news report that the United Arab Emirates are just bringing in registration this summer. And that coincides with the launch of a commercial drone delivery system in Dubai, I think, which is due to start the beginning of 2018. So what we're seeing is the same arguments being used in the same airspaces in different parts of the world to promote or push forward the same agenda. And it's always education, registration, safety, airliners, dodgy amateur drone pilots that fly them up to 5,000 feet, whiz round, and are going to kill an Airbus full of people. But the real reason is we need, you know, the regulators are being bought off essentially by Amazon, by other commercial giants who are wanting to push through this delivery service. The only way they can do that realistically is regulation, which is then teed into a traffic management system, so that they can then control the airspace that their drones are flying through. That's why if you look at the weight limits, you're looking at registration of 250 grams. That's never going to cause any damage to an airliner, but it would cause damage to an Amazon drone delivery drone that's flying through. So really what they're concerned about is mid-air collisions, but they're using this false flag almost of airliner safety to push through a very commercial agenda. And it's happening all over the world.
Are we going to end up creating sets of rules and regulations for a service that I think will be slightly pointless in a lot of cases? Are we going to completely change the rules for something that's not going to work?
Yeah, you know, the worst thing about that is that the public aren't being asked this at all. They're not being asked, do they want drones? This weekend we had a report out on Amazon's patent for cameras in drones, that they want to video and photograph people's properties and the premises. They notice that you've got some brown patches on your lawn, then they'll send you an email saying, oh, we noticed this, would you like this fertilizer product? So you know, if we suggested for a minute that the police would do this or the NSA would do this, there'd be widespread outrage. But because the target that they're using, the scapegoat that they're using are amateur drone pilots, and because there's been this pejorative news story and this narrative for the past 2 or 3 years that everyone seems to agree with very little evidence, saying you can't trust amateur drone pilots, they're complete idiots and they're going to kill a bunch of people. You know what, for the number of drones that have been bought throughout the world that have been flown by people who theoretically don't know what they're doing, they haven't caused a great number of accidents. If it was any other piece of technology, people would say, it's crazy, where are you getting these stories from? But for some reason with drones, we just accept it. And the regulators are happy with that because the people with the money are happy with that. And this is a system we're going to get.
And that's a good comment you make as well, actually, about Amazon, you know, scanning your lawn and going, oh, you know, we can offer this service. You know, imagine that en masse. It's just like the car insurance people when they ring you and say, oh, we hear you've been in an accident. Do you need to make a claim, or do you need to go and have a specialist medical service? You're going to now get people inspecting your roofs autonomously for you, going, oh, you've got a dislodged tile. Here's a building nearby that will come and do it for X, Y, and Z. I mean, come on. It's crazy.
Well, Ian, what we do here when people talk, well, what we've started doing, what I think we've done once, is when somebody talks sense and makes sense, then we black card you. I haven't got a black card; it's a blackish GPS. We don't allow common sense here. That's not allowed. The common sense does not happen in the drone world. So consider yourself chastised. Great stuff, guys. Link down below. Read his stuff and take it in. And we need to move on. Time's cracking on. We're going to be late. David Kovar, the two Davids there.
The Davids.
Your phone, the Davids.
I need Kevin on here for the Kevin.
Yeah, there you go. Your phone must have been ringing off the hook because there has been some talk about drone data security over the last weekend. How has it been for you so far, David Kovar?
It has been a lot of sitting down and explaining to people that there may be a certain amount of smoke, but there's not necessarily fire. There's a lot of people, Kevin is a very good example, working on actually documenting the fire. But right now, what some of the agencies are doing, such as the Army, is they're taking a risk-based approach to it. Is our data secure? They may have done the analysis to demonstrate that their data is not secure. Or they may have said that we have enough circumstantial evidence, or there's enough potential for the data to not be secure, that we're just going to say you can't use UAVs made by this particular vendor. The Israeli Army is an example of this. The Israeli Army is doing risk analysis. They're saying, well, even if this is losing data to China, we're just going to use these UAVs for, unclassified missions, and they're going ahead and using them. That's pure risk analysis. They're making decisions. Even if we demonstrate that China is absolutely sucking up telemetry and video, there may be times that it's still legitimate to use them. You've got to sit down and understand what's really going on and make your own decisions based upon that.
And where was I going to go with that? I've forgotten. There was something I was going to go with.
I could talk about this for hours, so you better come up with a question.
Yeah. Really. All right, I'll come up with it. I know what I wanted to ask you, grown-ups. That's Kevin and the two Davids, and perhaps someone else knows. Tinker's been removed. Why was that important?
Well, allegedly it's scheduled for removal. And that's from the boards right there that Kevin's posted and provided us already. DJI's tech has been made aware of it. And I'll let the Davids handle exactly what Tinker is and why that's a violation of note.
So the problem with things like Tinker, from my perspective, Tinker is essentially legitimate malware. One of the things that malware really wants to do is it wants to get on your system, and then it wants to allow a remote operator the ability to change the behavior of your system and change the behavior of that component. So Tinker is essentially a legitimate package. It was included in some versions of DJI Go, and it meant that whoever controlled Tinker could change what was on that application. So the idea is that you can hot patch something. If the application's broken, you want to update it, you can hot patch it just like that. The problem is that you can also hot patch it to add functionality that the user might not want, or, and I'm speculating here rather than saying it actually happened, if there was functionality in it that all of a sudden somebody understood was there and we're starting to investigate, you could take that functionality away as well.
And just to touch on that as well, that bypasses and circumvents the requirements for Google Play Store, etc., where you deploy an app, it has to go through a process of quality checking and notifying of updates to the application. And
so I kind of have to laugh about Google Play Store. I mean, Google Play, I mean, they've got a very open environment. And the amount of malware that has been pushed out through legitimate apps or apps that pretend to be some other app or whatever, and the quality control around the apps in the Play Store is essentially laughable. And the other model is iOS. And you look at the apps on iOS and you look at the fact that these problems simply do not exist in that ecosystem. You pay a price for that sort of security. You may not like that particular sort of interface. There are a lot of reasons not to use Apple devices, but if you don't want to have some remote organization modifying your application in real time, don't use an Android phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, coming off the back of the US Army statement that came out, the other thing that we haven't discussed yet, and maybe it's a discussion for another show, is about where you're using third-party applications for a DJI device. I'm not going to name any, but you know them for where you're capturing data. When you send that data through that app to be processed, where is that data going? And that's something that hasn't been discussed yet with regards to the DJI scenario, but I think it needs to be discussed.
I'll throw 2 more points in that we can discuss later. One is all of those apps use DJI's SDK. So they are dependent on not only the DJI hardware, the UAV and all the other components, but they are dependent on the SDK to support them. The second one is that there are various cloud services that people are using that say, to get your telemetry data that we need for providing the service to you, you should upload your data to DJI, give us your DJI credentials, and then we'll sync the data down from DJI. So in those cases, we have a third-party service that's based in the United States saying, give all your data to DJI, and then we'll get it from them. So users are voluntarily, perhaps not with awareness, giving up potentially sensitive data to DJI for convenience. And there's a fundamental problem. We use Android phones because they're convenient. We use third-party services that require you to sync with DJI because they're convenient. Convenience is always one of the back pressures on security.
But it's okay.
Very well said.
I've seen that NOAA has a report out, and not NOAA, NOAH, has a report out.
Oh no!
Your data's safe and it's being looked after in a very nice little room at its even heated level.
Hold on a minute. That was with the DJI S1000 with its own hobbyist standard Futaba or whatever transmitter.
It can be presented correctly.
So I have a question. So NOAA is a U.S. government agency. Who okayed them actually doing that research, and who in their right mind allowed that document to go out as it was without going off and asking the people that wrote it up, hey, what else did you do, and do you really stand behind this, and is this really well researched? It really felt like a paid for PR piece, and something's odd happened there.
Surely not. Yeah. Surely some mistake.
Well, no, and The Verge is the one who ran that story. It's the only source that I read from it. Looking from the NOAA brief on it, they're using hardware DJI. It's an S1000, but they're not really leveraging the systems that we're talking about here either. They're talking about a secured. As soon as it was flown, they pulled the card off. They didn't use any other systems, and there's a lot of holes in that story that just don't add up. As well as it states in the story itself that one of the operators used a Phantom 3, a DJI Phantom 3, and actually identified the issue that we're talking about here, saying that there was no security to that data. So it's very contradicting in itself.
Well, I like the update at the very end of the article where it states, this article originally stated that NOAA study relied on DJI's native remote and iOS app. In fact, the test used
exactly
an independent ground station. So, I mean, come on. I mean, it's just like I was discussing this week on LinkedIn, and I wrote an article and basically went, back in the good old days when you flew a Wukong, the data didn't go anywhere. The camera on your memory card in your GH4 stayed in that camera. You've now got these smart systems that are out there, and users need to be aware of how they're managing and controlling the data with any UAS system they're using, not just DJI. They just need to understand what that system is capturing, where it's storing it, and is it meeting their own data protection as well as the client's expectations for data security and management of that data. And that's the fundamental thing with all of this.
Very good. Said like a company man. Very, very good. Cut your arm through here, and it says that, doesn't it? Like a stick of rock. I don't know if that means. Does that mean anything to Americans? Do you have sticks of rock?
I'm wearing my DJI shirt right now, and I'll tell you that in my response here, from reading the updated official response from Adam Linsberg about the article that was released by Gary and SUAS News. It touched on something that prompted my article back in May, and that was the actual collection of critical infrastructure for third-party clients using the default settings of the DJI system. That was the underlying reason why I wrote that article, that system, if flown by their default settings, was providing audio, video, and telemetry to foreign servers, which that information would then become out of your control and provided to someone else. On top of that, that audio recording of myself as the PIC who agreed to those terms could also record information that is in violation of US state and federal wiretapping laws. That was what prompted me to write that article. None of this and none of these addresses or DJI statements touch on any of that. They talk about US military programs, they talk about other situations, but the whole point of this and what it's about and what I believe has happened is that somebody researched the correct way and identified that packets of information are being sent unsolicited through the application, hence prompting the all stop. Now, if the IDF and if other agencies want to just keep going on their way, then that's what they can do. But my whole point on all of this was the fact that that information, by using their default settings, was not appropriate for commercial critical infrastructure collection or providing any of the projects.
I think that this would have happened even if, I'm not certain that somebody in the Army has determined that that data is going back to servers and unsolicited. I think it's likely, but I'm not certain it's actually happened. I think that we would have ended up here anyhow because the potential is there and the cost-benefit analysis says, hey, we only have apparently like 300 of these things. We're not using them for critical missions. Let's just solve the problem, ground them all, say you can't use them, wipe them out, and go on. And then we don't even have the problem. And we've got the U.S. Army and the U.S. government in general has a long history of looking at risk of potentially, mostly Chinese manufactured products and saying, hey, you can't use these anymore. So when ThinkPad, when IBM sold ThinkPads over to Lenovo in China, all of a sudden we started worrying about, okay, can we use Lenovo's for critical stuff? Hawaii network routers, all of a sudden that became a big issue. This is not new. And I think that we would have gotten to this, the Army saying, do not use DJI products anyhow. I'm not convinced that it's actually happening.
Fair enough. Well, with that, let's roll on down the list with 3 minutes to go. Well, last week, James Dunthorne joined us from Plowman Craven, and he made a very good point about flight controllers and things like that. And you mentioned a report, James, when you were on last week. You foolishly mentioned or asked if we'd read a report. So we sent you away to do your homework and summarize that report. So what I meant to say to everybody else was bring a snack and popcorn and we'll sit back, relax, and enjoy the dulcet tones of James as he runs us through the report. Oh, yeah, he's got snacks. Well done. Over to you, James.
Take your mute off, buddy.
No, let's not tell him. Let's let him keep going. James, your microphone. James.
Microphone, James.
There we go. Sorry, I was talking away. I didn't realise I was muted. But yeah, thank you very much for the homework this week. I've had very little to do this week, and so you've actually given me something to do. But yeah, basically it was about JARIS, who are joint. I can't remember what they stand for, but they basically they've got members from all of the CAAs from around the world essentially, and they're a group who sort of meet up and they come up with suggestions to NAAs to basically work out which way things are going forward. But I don't know if you were aware, back in December 2015 it was, EASA went and published a report which was a technical opinion, which was to do with the three categories of operation which they were talking about. So you had the open category, the specific, and the certified. Open is what most operators in the UK sort of operate under now, which is your 50 meter during flight, 30 meters on takeoff, and all of those standard set of rules. And they have very sort of like high restrictions essentially, and that's how things are mitigated through not allowing you to do very much at all. But the certified is more venturing towards sort of manned aviation, so full-size aircraft, and sort of abiding by the same kind of requirements as that. But what we're talking about here is the specific category, which is in the UK we call it the operational safety case, and it's basically you go through something called a SORA, which is a specific operations risk assessment. And this report by Jaris basically goes through this their proposals on how each NAA should impose this. So what the specific category allows you to do is to essentially do what you want, as long as you can justify what you would like to do and how you can do it safely. And that's how people have been going through it in the UK with their operational safety cases. But the problem we've got is that it depends on who basically ticks or stamps that bit of paper, and who's actually judging that operational safety case. And there doesn't appear to be very much consistency in these decisions. So actually, what this document is doing is giving us more of a scientific method to actually come to a determination as to whether a specific operation is safe to conduct. So it sort of takes you through what they call a bow tie analysis, or bow tie risk model, which is a holistic risk model, tries to basically saying that everything within the situation is relevant to each other, and it's all sort of interconnected. Rather than looking at risks on an individual basis, it's tying them all together to actually say, well, if a UAS operation goes out of control, as they say, and out of control means that it's not doing what it's meant to do. That could be gets into a collision or on a collision course with an aircraft. It could be that something on board goes wrong and the thing crashes. It could be a variety of things. But essentially what that will then relate to is either someone getting killed either on the ground or in the air, or some critical infrastructure being damaged. And these are the three things that they're really looking at. And they put all sorts of things like harm barriers in place to try and so you can place harm barriers between your essentially your operation being out of control, which is the middle of your bow tie, and the actual harms themselves. And you can also go and put in place threat barriers, which are between the threats on your left-hand side and the thing going out of control. So it's really sort of going through the whole process, but it seems like it's a good step in the way things could go, and I look forward to seeing the CAA implement that soon, because it's about time we had a bit of consistency behind these operational safety cases. I know we're Ploughman, Craven and Lucky, and we've had quite a good response with our operational safety cases, but maybe some other operators who might be deemed a bit smaller might not have had such a good response. And I think it's on a case by case basis a lot of the time, and how confident they feel with you as a company of actually being able to abide by your own rules and carry it out safely.
And I think there is, from what you're saying, James, that some of that is actually required, because I've seen a couple of OSCs now for Inspire operators where there is no mention of any additional risk processes going in place. If you mentioned bow tying it, it'd be something you'd wear on the day, not something you'd use within your risk management process. OSCs now appear to be handed out like sweets. The smallest OSC document I've seen at the moment is 17 pages long, and that'll allow you to get reduced distances on an Inspire 1. So yeah, things need to be beefed up and changed, I think. It's just now becoming part and parcel of standard permissions from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think that it's all about this consistency, and actually, if you go through the report, it's quite clever about how it talks about your ground risk class, and so it actually goes through, and you can say, right, this is the kind of areas I want to operate. These are the kind of heights that I'm going to be operating. You can come up with ground risk classes, you can come up with airspace risk classes, and that all determines as to what kind of mitigation you need to put in place. Actually, there's a huge list of things which they can, different mitigations they put in place for you, or suggest you could put in place. And then they go and rate it as to, right, does it need to be to a high fidelity, a medium fidelity, or a low fidelity for each one, depending on these ground threat levels and things like that. So it's actually quite a sort of, I wouldn't say robust process, but it's they're trying to quantify a lot of things rather than sort of having things on it. Oh, that feels about right. You know, that I think they've done enough. But you know, we actually got some numbers behind some of these things now. So if you want to take off within 10 meters of a person, you can actually go through this process and you can say, right, what do I need to do to be able to do that? And that just hasn't been in place up to now. So I think we're going to start seeing some of the NAAs from around, you know, different places around the world start implementing this, and hopefully we'll see a bit of consistency come back to this operational safety case process.
Do you reckon that will run worldwide, this, and not just Europe?
Well, I've seen NAAs from several countries. I can't remember the whole list, but I think there was some from Australia as well. So the JARIS does seem to be sort of, there's a lot of different NAAs from all over the world who are bringing in this. So it's definitely, it seems to be quite a consensus with this whole open, specific, and certified categories with the way things are going. So I think certified is definitely out of the question for a lot of us, you know, SUAS users. But obviously, the open category is what we'll get when we first go out and get our permission for aerial work. But this specific is really about trying to push the barriers that little bit further. So if we wanted to fly beyond line of sight, we would be operating in a specific category. If we want to reduce our distances, we would be in a specific category. So this is actually putting together a framework on actually how do we push things further? How do we go and do a little bit more with these drones rather than flying them in the middle of a field in Norfolk?
Well, who'd want to go to Norfolk to start with? I mean, crikey! I mean, Stephen Fry would like to go there. Well, I think you've done well with your homework there. I think you've done very well. And you've done well.
What grade do I get?
Well,
Can we have some diagrams next time, James?
Oh yes, and if there are diagrams, you must use colour. And Bruce will be the arbiter of diagrams and things like that from the render centre there. So thanks for that, James. And you haven't volunteered for anything this time. It's very good. You've learned from your mistakes. That's the main thing. Yeah, absolutely. Now, normally, dear viewer, we've got a couple of things to go on through here. Normally, we sort of say goodbye and all that. And what normally happens, dear viewer, is after we finish, the chat, once we've gone off air, degenerates into something that's more fun. So I'll see if we can try and do that without going off air. See if we can try and be more, I don't know, off the cuff. And speaking of off the cuff,
say it, Gary. Just say we're off air or not. Well, just say it.
All right, let's go.
3, 2, 1,
we're off air now. There we are. We're off air now, and that means that we can talk to Bruce in, because the first thing Bruce will do is he'll swear. I loved your in this week of chaos, Bruce, or weekend of chaos that's just occurred, and lots of news. I thoroughly enjoyed your little disc launch glider video that brought some peace and tranquility back into my life.
Yes, we had a lot of peace, and we've got acres of peace and tranquility at the moment because we're shrouded in fog and cloud and mist and things. Hang on, I'm just reading this off my cuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, now we've got 10 days of rain. Don't you love the winter? It's fantastic. It's, but it's interesting trying to fly in fog. It's all very well for the first 5 or 6 seconds, and then everything goes blurry because the lens on your camera gets covered in moisture. So that was an epic fail.
Oh dear. And did you have anything that you particularly wanted to rant about this evening?
No, I've done that already.
I've done that. Well, that's good. No, we can bring Loretta back into this. Isn't going very off the cuff, is it, really? Loretta, you've lost something this week. Come on, say, my name is Loretta, and whatever they said, you've lost something.
I did have a very sad day flying, but my good friends at DJI have made it good, and I am getting a new one tomorrow. So things happen, but I'm very happy to report that I will have a new Spark again soon.
That's very good. How many flights did you manage on it?
Well, it was actually my third flight, but it was my first real flight because I had gone just to test it. I've been flying. I had flown Phantoms until I got my Mavic, and I like the idea of going small, so I love the Spark. But it was my first day going to an open field and really testing it, and something went wrong, but it's been made right. So I'm very happy, and I'm looking forward to substituting it for my Mavic. I'm not sure that it will, but if it could, it's so lightweight that it's really a joy.
Loretta, do you want to share your experiences with the other Spark users, and what advice would you have for them not to be in the same situation as you? Avoid trees, or?
Well, I mean, something went wrong with it, so it was not user error. I mean, something did go wrong. So I think sometimes things just happen, but I did use a controller, and I do connect it with the wire. I didn't use Wi-Fi. But, you know, I mean, electronic things, sometimes something goes wrong. And in my years of flying DJI products, this was the first problem I've had. So
it's another one where we can cut that. Does that make sense in America? Can I just confirm? Do you know what I say when they say a stick of rock? You cut through
No.
this word. You don't know what that is.
Translate that for us Americans, please.
Yeah, well, you know, you're a new country. You've not been around long. You wouldn't understand these things. It's you know, do you not have Seaside Rock over there? I'm going to have to get some SUS News Seaside Rock made up and sent over.
Candy. It's called Candy.
Oh no, that's a girl. She works in our spa actually. She's the boss's daughter. But yeah, so Candy came with lettering in it. You must have it over there. That must be international. Rock. Someone's saying rock treats in the comments.
Yeah, just
right.
so you know, rock is not crack cocaine. It's
Oh, you had to go there.
That's the US version. In the UK, it's different.
Somebody find a picture of Seaside Rock. Just put me out of my misery.
Please. God, I want to see Seaside Rock.
You have Seaside. You do have Seaside Rock. Okay, all right. Okay. So if we cut Loretta's one, it'll have DJI written all around the inside of her arm. So there's a David put a picture up there. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
That's called taffy. That's called taffy.
Yeah.
Or
Taffy.
See, I grew up on the ocean. We have saltwater taffy. That's what that would be called.
Seaside Rock, saltwater taffy, same difference.
That's always on
There you go.
Scooby-Doo, isn't it? It's always on Scooby-Doo, that stuff. I know that. And it was always the janitor. So with that, so someone says tattoo here, and that puts me in mind of earlier on we mentioned extreme flying going on with hacked DJI drones, and somebody with tattoos is putting himself in the frame for quite some hefty fines in the UK, I think. David, do you want to pick up on that or say anything to that? Or should I not have said that?
There are a few operators operating in ways that they shouldn't be. And I think more will be coming out over the following weeks. And I think we should leave it at that.
Oh, all right then.
Well, you know, we had the same thing here in the States with Casey Neistat and all the YouTubers out there that fly incredibly dangerously, you know, just horrible missions, bad influence. They've got millions of followers, and they're out there breaking, you know, 16 or 17 different airspace regulations, flying over people. It turns out that it's very hard to convict them. Even after FAA investigation, you know, and I believe David spoke upon this, you actually need to see them at the controllers and have evidence of the such. And earlier, and this is interesting because the FAA told local law enforcement from earlier releases not to get involved and to just document with images and statements. That's changed where now, you know, local law enforcement are getting involved, but these live streams and these people trying to push the envelope and these challenges that they're posting out there is just a scourge, and it's something that needs to be stopped by any and all ability of people on this panel and people that watch this. That's going to end someone's life, and that's not good.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, even the local law enforcement now in the UK, they're now setting up dedicated task forces, you know, to be able to tackle the flight log decoding. You know, they're capturing the guys' devices now, the phones. The cyber security teams are now investigating the videos and trying to put all the pieces together. I've actually reached out to a few of them as well to see if I can be of assistance in some of those cases. So it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out in the UK because, you know, as we spoke about earlier, the registration system coming, the more and more this happens, the more fuel it adds to the fire. And it's something we don't need. You know, we don't need these people representing the rest of the community because they don't. They absolutely don't.
What's going to happen now that we're getting this? Like I was thinking with that was it Spark that flew away? These drones are getting really small now, and the functionality is really high. So already I've got quite a few sub 250 gram drones, and they're just almost as fast as my larger ones for racing. What's going to happen when all this functionality is now built into a 249 gram package? Will we see the regulators saying, "Oh, suddenly no, it has to be 200 grams"? Will they actually track it down because do they want to actually control these things? Is safety the big issue, or is it control? If it's control, I think once we get the functionality under 250 grams, we're going to see the regulations start shifting, so that more and more of control is exerted over the craft that can do what the Spark does today and what the Phantom 4 does today.
You know, that's a great statement because I'm going to mention something in the state of New Jersey, boat registration. So how big a boat do you need to register? And what does that really mean? Does it come down to safety or control? Go ahead and look at it from the same drone perspective. You know, if you have something that can achieve very high, fast air speeds or cause damage in a very small package, you're correct in a sense that it would be a safety situation where they would have to amend those rules to take into account. I raced a Phantom with a Spark a couple weeks ago, and it kept up and actually passed the Phantom. So it can achieve the same airspeed.
There's something that we're not really like adding into the mix here, and that's physics. So if you've got a stiff wind, I don't care how much this thing, how fast it is. If it doesn't have the mass, it's going to get blown away, right? So well, I mean, I think that you've I think that
that's what it is. That's rock. That's rock.
Yeah, I got you.
Rock.
I think that, you know, they're at a certain point that, you know, like the Spark is not capable of carrying a payload. It's got a very short flight time, and it weighs 250 grams, and a stiff breeze is going to really, you know, take it away.
Yeah, but it also has full automation and controls. I can add a small lethal package to that Spark and send it on an automated mission, and it can perform that mission successfully. So that means that it should be under that same category, and that's where the whole safety, not control, comes in. Yes, physics are applied, and it's a lightweight airframe, but just saying that it can perform. Before those regulations, when they were written, there was no drones that size that could perform at that level of technology.
Yeah, the weight doesn't come into it. I mean, I have little quads which are like, you know, 200 grams. They can fly in a 20-knot wind, and weight doesn't have a factor. It makes them more stable. Weight can make it more stable and is likely to be affected by turbulence. But in terms of speed, some of these small quads are incredibly fast. And if you've got, obviously, to counter the effects of a wind, speed is what you need. So if the little quad can fly at, you know, 80 kilometers an hour, you can fly it in a 50k wind without any problems at all.
And in the comments, Ian's saying that 700 people a year are killed by toasters, and this comes back to some of the points you were making before, Bruce. And then Robert Elliott suggests toaster drones. So surely that would be all the world's lethality rolled up into one terrible device.
If you fly a toaster drone over a US military installation, can they shoot it down?
Apparently they can.
Absolutely.
Well,
yeah, they can shoot anything down.
Well, Yusuf, I heard, I heard, a little bird told me that hung around an airfield a bit, that the USAF actually wanted to also do that en route. So if they were barreling through at low level, anything that came in front of them, they'd want to get out of the way as well. And that immediately makes people now saying, well, how are they going to shoot all these things down? How's this going to work? Well, I think we'd all know it'd be electronic, wouldn't it? You just shoot it down with some RF. A shoot down doesn't have to be a kinetic event. But I'll throw that's a rant from me. I'll throw that back at the floor.
So, all right. So one thing we didn't talk about. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, if you have a fully autonomous UAV that's flying on internal navigation, so not using GPS, how are you going to kill it with RF?
Well, just with enough RF, just enough RF for kill anything.
It's got no RF. It's got no RF receivers on board that are powered up.
You'd have to melt it.
You're gonna.
You could. I'm pretty sure you could. Well, Bruce might have some ideas. I know back in the day when I worked for the Queen, there were some things that could do some pretty impressive things.
And I mean, they've demonstrated various electromagnetic, laser, other sorts of high energy weapons against UAVs and other threats. The problem is they are very expensive. They are very high energy, and you need to keep them locked on target for long enough for them to actually burn through. And if you've got a small UAV, first of all, acquiring the target with any sort of precision is tough. And second of all, if it's maneuvering at all, you got to stay on target. So,
well, there were things that would turn off everybody's televisions on the whole.
Well, there's the other problem. It's the collateral
damage. That is the big. That's where I was hoping this would lead. If they really did want to do that, and if they wanted to do that at a military base, well, what's happening? Not quite downwind, but down signal.
I'm flying a Cessna, 152, 5 miles away. That happens to be directly right behind that drone, and all of a sudden, my engine's got a hole through it. Burned by some sort of laser. It's like, okay, I'm very unhappy. Who do I sue? Do I sue the drone operator who was flying illegally, in quotes?
Actually, your wife would sue him, not you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a very neat hole burned through my forehead.
Yeah.
It's illegal to shine a laser at an airplane anyway. Don't
you
know?
People get arrested.
Exactly. Oh, here's something else. So in the United States and maybe somewhere else, United Rentals is now renting drones. They've got Matrice 100 packages.
Oh, no.
So I see everyone's collective head shake right now.
That's the registration system out the window.
No. You got to register with United Rentals, and then you're good to go.
Yeah. So you'd have to give them your ID and then pay them your credit card. So they're going to have a trace on it. But that's just interesting. When you look at a full-blown, okay, we now have drones to rent. That's kind of where this proliferation has gone. Such a short amount of time.
You could easily use a clone credit card, though, couldn't you, to go and rent? That's how they steal the cars for the hire cars. You could just clone a credit card.
Oh my goodness, that's breaking the rules, David. No, it's breaking the rules. People don't break rules.
Just a minute. To steal a car, clone credit card. Just making a note.
So
what else
do
I need to do?
Well, that's back on.
I think maybe Gary should tinfoil your Viking horns there.
Yeah,
I tried to do that earlier, but his voice was.
I was going to, but the only tinfoil in the house is a square about that big. I'm pretty convinced if I use that tinfoil, I would be in a deep amount of trouble, and it really is not worth the admin. It really isn't.
Life's tough. It's tough at home, huh?
I won't be drawn. I know my place.
Anyway, I just see it's running late. Thank you very much for sharing the memo from the U.S. Army. Thank you very much for supporting that effort, and thank you to everyone on this panel who has had to take phone calls and interview requests and be in contact with certain individuals. That was my goal originally, and that's why I said there's a lot of people who've written about this 2015, 2016, but my goal was only to educate those that, default settings were set to do that, and that's happened. So fantastic job. And now there's other things that are on the horizon, cloud processing securities, other situations that are going to be addressed too. So it's been a great time there. And thank you very much for all that support.
Indeed, yes. So thanks very much to everyone for hanging around for so long. 24 minutes over time. I see what you did there, XJet, in the comments. Foiled again, very good. He's here all week at the end of the pier with the Seaside Rock. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Dear viewer, thank you also. Like, subscribe, all those other things down the bottom. These comments, the live chat, unfortunately disappears now, which is a real pain. So if you've got any other comments or anything else you want to say to us, then put it in the comments a bit up afterwards. We hope to see you again next week, 2100 GMT, every Tuesday or Wednesday morning if you're on the other side of the world in the future. And yeah, rubbish in this bit, aren't I? Cheerio, everyone. Thanks.
All right.
Cheers.
Russians and China.
Yeah, guys.